The village of Tumaini lay cradled in the heart of the savannah, a place where time seemed to slow under the shade of ancient baobab trees. Life in Tumaini followed rhythms as old as the land itself, with mornings dedicated to work and evenings spent sharing stories under the starlit sky. It was a place where traditions were cherished and change was met with caution, if not resistance. For Amina, Tumaini had always been home, but it had also been a cage. At 19, she was not just bright but fiercely ambitious, her mind constantly reaching for a life beyond the village. Her love of learning had set her apart from an early age, and when she earned a scholarship to study in the nearby town of Daraja, her heart soared. It was an opportunity few in Tumaini could even dream of, and yet it was met with unease, especially by her father, Abasi. "Amina, you must understand," Abasi had said the night before she left, his tone heavy with both pride and caution. "This education is a privilege, but it must never make you forget where you come from. You carry the honor of this family. Do not let us down." Amina nodded, her heart a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She knew what her father meant. In Tumaini, honor was everything, and any deviation from tradition could be seen as a betrayal. But she had dreams that couldn't fit within the village's narrow expectations. She wanted to become a teacher, to inspire young minds, and to break the cycle of poverty that bound so many. The whispers begin. In the beginning, the whispers were faint, mere murmurs that drifted through the marketplace like the breeze. "Amina has gone to the town," someone would say, and another would reply, "It's not right for a girl to live alone among strangers." As weeks turned into months, the whispers grew louder, fueled by rumor and speculation. "She was seen laughing with a man at the market," claimed one neighbor. "They say she wears clothes that don't cover her properly," added another. To those who had never left Tumaini, the town was a place of temptation and corruption, a world that threatened to pull their children away from tradition. For Amina, the town had been a revelation. It was noisy and chaotic, but it was also alive with opportunities. She spent her days in the classroom, soaking up knowledge, and her nights dreaming of the future. She had friends who shared her ambitions and teachers who encouraged her to think beyond the limits of the village. But back in Tumaini, her absence became a canvas for people's fears and insecurities. The villagers began to paint her as someone who had forgotten her roots, someone who had traded honor for ambition. Even her mother, Zuri, couldn't escape the growing tide of judgment. "Zuri, how can you sleep at night, knowing your daughter is out there, behaving like a city girl?" asked a neighbor one afternoon as they pounded millet together. Zuri said nothing, but the words stung. She wanted to believe in her daughter, but the weight of the whispers was becoming unbearable. A tense return. When Amina returned to Tumaini for a short visit, she was met with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Her siblings ran to greet her, their laughter a welcome reprieve, but the rest of the village watched her with guarded eyes. Even the familiar pathways seemed different, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Her mother embraced her tightly, whispering, "It's good to have you home, my child." But there was a tension in Zuri's smile that Amina couldn't ignore. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was strained. Abasi sat at the head of the table, his silence louder than words. Finally, he spoke. "Amina," he began, his tone measured, "what is this I hear about you spending time with men in the town?" Amina looked up sharply. "What? Baba, that's not true. I've done nothing wrong." "The village talks," Abasi said, his voice rising slightly. "They say you've forgotten your place, your family, your values." Amina's hands clenched into fists under the table. "Baba, they're just rumors. People will always talk, but I've been studying, working hard. You have to believe me." Abasi's eyes narrowed. "The village does not lie, Amina. If there is even a grain of truth in these rumors, it brings shame to all of us." Zuri placed a hand on her husband's arm. "Abasi, she's our daughter. We must trust her." But Abasi shook his head, his disappointment cutting through the room like a blade. "Trust is earned, Zuri, and right now I see nothing but disgrace." The shadows deepened. The next day, as Amina walked through the village, she felt the weight of every gaze. Women whispered behind their hands. Children pointed and giggled, and even the elders shook their heads as she passed. It was as though she had become a stranger in her own home. That evening, her childhood friend Kofi found her sitting alone under the baobab tree that marked the village's center. His face was lined with concern. "Amina, you need to be careful," he said, his voice low. The elders are talking about you. They think you've brought dishonor to your family. Amina's chest tightened. Kofi, you know me. You know I wouldn't do anything to shame my family. I know, Kofi replied. But in this village, perception matters more than truth. They're saying your actions have angered the spirits. That's dangerous talk. What do you mean? Amina asked, her voice trembling. Kofi hesitated, then leaned closer. They're considering a ritual to cleanse the shame. The words sent a chill through Amina's body. She had heard of such rituals before, ceremonies meant to restore balance and appease the spirits. But they were always rooted in sacrifice. What kind of ritual? She whispered. Kofi looked away, unable to meet her eyes. You need to leave, Amina, tonight. Amina's heart raced as she realized the gravity of her situation. The whispers had grown into a storm, and she was at its center. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, she knew one thing for certain. Her life in Tumaini would never be the same again. The tension in the Aduel household was palpable. Ever since Amina's return to Tumaini, the air had grown thick with unspoken words and stolen glances. Abasi, usually a man of measured words and deliberate actions, was increasingly restless. The whispers from the village had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and it was growing with every passing day. That evening, the family gathered for dinner, as they always did. The fire in the center of the room flickered, casting shadows on the mud brick walls. The younger children ate in silence, sensing the unease between their father and eldest sister. Zuri, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep the conversation light, but even her warm smile couldn't dispel the tension. Abasi set his calabash down with a thud, the sound cutting through the quiet. Amina, he began, his tone heavy with authority, I've heard troubling things. Amina looked up from her plate, her brow furrowing. What things, Baba? Rumors, he said, his voice growing sharper, that you've been seen with men in the town, that you wear clothes that bring shame to this family, that you've forgotten who you are. Amina felt her stomach drop. Baba, those are lies. I've done nothing wrong. I go to school, I study, and I return home. That's all. The village does not lie, Amina, Abasi countered, his eyes narrowing. If even half of what they say is true, you've brought dishonor to our family. Zuri placed a gentle hand on his arm. Abasi let her explain. She's our daughter. Surely we must hear her out. She's had plenty of chances to explain, he snapped, shrugging off her touch. But her actions speak louder than her words. Amina's hands clenched into fists under the table. Why do you believe them over me? Baba, I've worked so hard to make you proud, to honor this family. I would never do anything to disgrace us. Abasi leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The elders think differently. They believe your behavior has angered the spirits. Do you understand what that means? Amina's breath caught in her throat. Spirits? Baba, this is madness. I've done nothing to anger anyone, let alone the spirits. Abasi sat back, his expression unreadable. Whether you believe it or not, the village believes it. And perception is everything. If the elders decide that a cleansing ritual is necessary, there will be nothing I can do to stop it. The following day, Abasi called a meeting with the village elders. The gathering took place under the sprawling baobab tree that stood at the heart of Tumaini. Its twisted branches seemed to reach toward the heavens, a silent witness to countless decisions and disputes over the years. Amina stood at her father's side, her heart pounding as the elders arrived one by one. They were men of great age and influence, their faces etched with wisdom and judgment. Each carried a staff adorned with beads and charms, symbols of their authority. The head elder, Mzee Baraka, spoke first. Abasi, you have called us here to discuss your daughter's conduct. What would you have us do? Abasi hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Amina. She denies the accusations, but the village speaks of her actions in the town. They say she has brought shame to our family and dishonor to our traditions. Mzee Baraka stroked his long beard thoughtfully. The spirits are easily angered by such things. If she has truly strayed, the entire village could suffer. Amina stepped forward, her voice firm despite her fear. With all due respect, elders, these accusations are baseless. I have done nothing but study and work toward a better future. Is that such a crime? Another elder, Mzee Kamba, narrowed his eyes. And yet the whispers persist. Where there is smoke, there is fire. They are only whispers, Amina insisted. Rumors started by people who fear change, who cannot understand why a girl might want more for herself. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions grave. Finally, Baraka raised his hand for silence. We will deliberate. But understand this, child. If the spirits demand restitution, it will be made. That evening, the weight of the elders' decision hung over the Adewale household like a storm cloud. Abasi paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. Zuri sat silently by the fire, her face drawn with worry. Baba, Amina said, breaking the silence, do you really believe I've done something wrong? Abasi stopped pacing and turned to face her. It doesn't matter what I believe, Amina. What matters is what the village believes. My duty is to protect this family's honor, even if it means sacrificing me, she interrupted, her voice rising. Is that what you're saying? Zuri stood, placing herself between them. Enough. This family has been through enough pain. Abasi, you know your daughter, you know her heart. How can you let the village poison your mind against her? Abasi's shoulders slumped, the fire in his eyes dimming. I don't know what to believe anymore. The whispers have grown too loud to ignore. Amina stepped closer, her voice soft but resolute. Baba, I love this family. Everything I've done has been for you, for us. Please don't let gossip destroy what we have. For a moment, it seemed as though Abasi might relent. But then, as if on cue, the distant sound of a drum echoed through the village. It was a summons, a call to action. The elders have made their decision, Abasi said, his voice heavy with resignation. We must go. The entire village gathered under the baobab tree that night, the flickering light of torches casting eerie shadows on the ground. Amina stood in the center of the circle, her heart pounding as the elders approached. Baraka raised his staff, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. The spirits demand a cleansing. To restore balance, a ritual must be performed. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Amina's knees buckled, but she steadied herself. What does that mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Kamba stepped forward, his expression grim. It means your innocence must be proven, and if it cannot, he trailed off, the implication clear. Amina's gaze darted to her father. Baba, please, you can't let this happen. Abasi looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The decision has been made. As the elders began to chant, the villagers joined in, their voices rising in a haunting crescendo. Amina stood frozen, her mind racing. She had always believed in the strength of her family, in the bonds that tied them together. But now, as the flames danced and the shadows closed in, she realized she was alone. The night was heavy with a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets. The moon hung low, casting an eerie glow over the village of Tumaini. Inside the Adewale household, the air was thick with unease as Abasi called for a family meeting. Amina sat cross-legged on the mat, her gaze flickering between her father and the shadows dancing on the walls from the dim firelight. Zuri sat beside her, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her shawl. The younger siblings had been sent to bed, leaving only the adults in the room. Amina, Abasi began, his tone heavy and somber. Tonight, the elders have asked us to discuss something of great importance. Amina frowned, her unease growing. What is it, Baba? She asked cautiously. Instead of answering, Abasi gestured for her to stand. Come with me. The elders await at the baobab tree. Zuri's head shot up, her eyes wide with alarm. Abasi, is this really necessary? She is our daughter. Abasi's face hardened. This is not just about our family, Zuri. This is about the honor of the entire village. Amina's heart pounded as she stood reluctantly, her mind racing with possibilities. She had heard of secret meetings before, gatherings held under the cover of darkness to resolve disputes or seek the will of the spirits. But what could this possibly have to do with her? The baobab tree loomed like a sentinel in the center of the village, its gnarled branches reaching skyward. Torches surrounded its base, their flames flickering in the night breeze. The elders stood in a circle, their expressions grim and unreadable. Villagers whispered among themselves at a distance, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the torches. As Amina approached with Abasi, the murmurs grew louder. She could feel their eyes boring into her, their judgments as heavy as the weight in her chest. The head elder, Baraka, raised his staff to silence the crowd. Amina, he began, his voice deep and commanding, you have been accused of dishonoring your family and this village. The spirits have been angered by your actions. Amina's breath caught. What actions? She demanded, her voice trembling. I have done nothing wrong. Nzikamba stepped forward, his weathered face lined with disdain. The whispers of the village speak volumes. They say you have brought shame upon your name, that you have abandoned our traditions for the temptations of the town. They are lies. Amina cried, her voice breaking. I have done nothing but study and work to make my family proud. Enough, Abasi barked, his voice cutting through her protests. He turned to the elders. She denies the accusations, but the spirits demand justice. What must be done? Baraka's gaze was cold. To cleanse the dishonor, a ritual must be performed. The spirits require a sacrifice to restore balance. The words struck Amina like a blow. She stared at her father, her eyes wide with disbelief. Baba, you can't believe this. You can't let this happen. Abasi avoided her gaze, his face a mask of conflict and resolve. This is for the good of the family, Amina, for the good of the village. Two elders stepped forward, their hands outstretched. Amina instinctively stepped back, but Abasi grabbed her arm, his grip firm. Don't fight this, he whispered, his voice shaking. It will be over soon. Amina struggled as the elders dragged her toward a shallow pit dug near the base of the baobab tree. Her cries echoed through the night. Please, Baba, don't do this. Mama, help me. Zuri stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She took a step forward, but Abasi's stern glance stopped her in her tracks. This is not your place, Zuri, he said, his voice harsh. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Amina was forced into the pit. Her nails clawed at the dirt as she tried to pull herself out, her screams tearing through the night. Please no, I didn't do anything wrong. Baraka raised his staff, signaling the start of the ritual. The elders began chanting, their voices low and rhythmic, growing louder with each passing moment. One by one, they threw handfuls of dirt into the pit, their faces emotionless as Amina's cries grew fainter. The weight of the earth pressed down on her chest, each layer of soil stealing more of her breath. Panic set in as she realized the full horror of her situation. She kicked and thrashed, but the dirt was relentless, filling her mouth and nostrils. Her screams turned to muffled sobs as the world above faded into darkness. In her final moments of consciousness, Amina thought of her mother's face, her siblings' laughter, and the dreams she would never see fulfilled. A single tear slid down her cheek, disappearing into the soil as silence enveloped her. Above ground, the chanting ceased. The villagers dispersed, their faces a mixture of relief and unease. Zuri stood motionless, her heart shattered. Abasi placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch heavy with guilt. It is done, he said quietly. But deep beneath the earth, a spark of life remained. Amina's body lay still, but her mind refused to surrender. Somewhere in the suffocating darkness, a fire ignited within her, a will to survive, to rise again, and to confront those who had betrayed her. Darkness engulfed her. The cold, suffocating weight of the earth pressed against Amina's chest, filling her nostrils and threatening to crush the air from her lungs. She opened her mouth to scream, but the dirt rushed in, choking her cries. Panic surged through her body as her mind raced to comprehend the horror of her situation. For a moment she froze. Her body trembled with fear, and her heart pounded against the confines of her ribcage. Was this it? Was this how her story would end, alone, buried in the ground by the very people she loved? No, she thought fiercely, her mind clawing for hope as desperately as her fingers began clawing at the dirt. I will not die here. Her nails scraped against the soil, breaking and bleeding as she pushed upward with every ounce of strength she had left. The earth resisted, heavy and unyielding, but Amina's determination burned brighter than her fear. She thought of her mother's tears, her siblings' innocent laughter, and the life she had fought so hard to build. These memories became her lifeline. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she dug, her body screaming in pain. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, and her vision blurred with exhaustion. But then her fingers broke through the surface. Cool night air rushed against her hand, and a surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She clawed faster, using her last reserves of strength to pull herself upward. When her face finally emerged into the open air, Amina gasped for breath, her lungs greedily filling with oxygen. The stars above shimmered faintly, their light offering a quiet reassurance. She dragged herself fully out of the grave, collapsing onto the ground in a trembling heap. Dirt clung to her skin, and her clothes were torn and soaked with sweat, but she was alive. Tears streamed down her face as she lay there, staring at the sky. The betrayal of her family and the cruelty of the village cut deep, but the simple fact that she had survived gave her a newfound resolve. "They thought they could bury me," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible, "but I'm still here." Amina's body trembled as she sat up, her hands brushing the dirt from her face. Every muscle ached, and her fingers were raw and bleeding, but the pain only fueled her determination. She glanced back at the shallow grave, now a dark scar on the earth beneath the baobab tree. It was a chilling reminder of how close she had come to death. She thought of her father's face, hardened and unyielding as he delivered her into the hands of the elders. She thought of the villagers, their chants echoing in her mind like a haunting melody. And she thought of her mother, standing silent and helpless, her tears falling like rain. Amina's chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. "How could they do this to me?" she murmured, her voice cracking. "How could my own family betray me?" Her anger flared, hot and consuming. But beneath it lay a deeper resolve. She could not allow their actions to define her. She would survive, and she would return, not as a victim, but as a force of truth and justice. The night was eerily quiet as Amina began to walk. Her steps were unsteady at first, her body weak from the ordeal, but she forced herself to move forward. The cool breeze carried the scent of the savannah, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness she had just escaped. Each step felt like a small victory, a defiance of the fate the village had tried to impose on her. As she walked, she replayed the events of the past few days in her mind. The accusations, the confrontations, the pitiful look in her father's eyes as he cast her aside. The pain was overwhelming, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of clarity. She had always believed in the strength of family, in the bonds that held them together. But now she saw how fragile those bonds could be when tested by fear and ignorance. Her journey was aimless at first, her only goal to put as much distance between herself and Tumaini as possible. The village had betrayed her, and she needed time to process what had happened and decide her next move. But one thing was certain, she would not let this break her. After hours of walking, Amina came upon a small stream. She knelt by the water, her reflection barely visible in the moonlight. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her hair matted and tangled. But in her eyes, she saw a glimmer of the strength that had carried her through the night. She cupped her hands, splashing water onto her face and drinking deeply. The cool liquid soothed her parched throat and revived her weary spirit. As she sat back on her heels, she gazed up at the stars, their light a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond Tumaini. "I survived for a reason," she said softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I will not let their lies destroy me. I will prove them wrong." The stars seemed to twinkle in agreement, their silent presence offering a sense of comfort. Amina stood, her body still aching but her spirit unbroken. She had been buried, but she had risen. And now she would reclaim her life, no matter what it took. As dawn began to break, Amina reached the top of a small hill. The rising sun bathed the landscape in warm golden light, casting away the shadows of the night. She paused, taking in the beauty of the world around her. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to hope. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she could not yet foresee. But Amina knew one thing. She would face it with courage and determination. Her journey was just beginning, and she would not stop until she had reclaimed her dignity and her future. With one last glance at the horizon, she took a deep breath and stepped forward, leaving the darkness of her past behind. The road stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of dust winding through the savannah. Amina's bare feet kicked up small clouds with each step, the dry earth clinging to her legs as if trying to hold her back. Her body screamed for rest, her muscles aching from the ordeal of clawing her way out of the grave, but she forced herself forward. Stopping was not an option, not now. Her mind was a storm of emotions. The faces of her father and the elders loomed large in her thoughts, their expressions a cruel mixture of judgment and betrayal. She replayed the scene again and again, her father's averted gaze, the cold chants of the elders, the feel of dirt covering her body as her desperate cries fell on deaf ears. "How could they?" she whispered hoarsely, her voice breaking in the quiet of the night. "How could he do this to me?" The vast sky above seemed indifferent to her anguish, the stars shimmering faintly in the darkness. The moon offered little comfort, its pale light casting long shadows that danced eerily on the ground. Amina shivered despite the warm air. The world felt empty, as if she were the last soul left to wander its desolate paths. Every sound on the road startled her, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a jackal, the occasional flap of wings overhead. Each noise seemed to carry the echoes of the village, the whispers of the people who had condemned her. She could almost hear them, their voices hissing accusations. She brought this upon herself. The spirits demanded it. She shamed her family. Amina clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Anger flared in her chest, hot and consuming. They had taken everything from her, her dignity, her place in the village, her trust in the people she had loved. But beneath the anger lay something deeper, heartbreak. The image of her father turning his back on her cut through her like a blade. He had been her protector, her guide, and yet he had allowed this to happen. "Baba," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Why?" As the hours dragged on, the night began to give way to dawn. The sky turned from deep black to soft hues of purple and orange, the first rays of sunlight breaking over the horizon. Amina paused on a small rise, her breath hitching at the sight. For a moment, the beauty of the sunrise distracted her from her pain. It was a reminder that the world was still turning, that life was continuing, even if hers felt like it had been shattered into a million pieces. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing dirt and tears across her skin. The faint light gave her a sliver of hope, a reminder of why she needed to keep moving. Her innocence, her truth, her very life depended on her finding a way to clear her name. Her steps grew steadier as the sun climbed higher, its warmth chasing away the chill of the night. Each step felt symbolic, a small defiance against the forces that had tried to break her. Amina began to focus on her plan. She needed a safe place to rest, food to regain her strength, and a way to gather the evidence that would prove her innocence. Memories of her time in the town surfaced, of the teachers who had encouraged her and the friends who had shared her dreams. Perhaps someone there could help her. But the journey back to the town was long, and she had no idea how far she had wandered in the night. Still, the thought of seeing a familiar face gave her the resolve to keep going. She imagined herself walking into the village one day, standing tall and unbroken, and confronting the people who had condemned her. The image was enough to bring a faint smile to her cracked lips. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and Amina's energy began to wane. Her throat was parched, her stomach empty, and her feet blistered from the relentless journey. She stumbled but caught herself, her resolve stronger than her exhaustion. In the distance, she saw the outline of a tree, its broad branches offering shade. Amina quickened her pace, her body crying out for rest. When she reached the tree, she collapsed against its trunk, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The shade felt like a blessing, a small mercy after the hell she had endured. As she rested, her thoughts turned once again to her family. She wondered if her mother had wept for her, if her siblings had asked where she was. Did they believe she was gone? Did they even care? The questions swirled in her mind, each one heavier than the last. But Amina refused to let despair consume her. She was alive, and as long as she was alive, she had a chance to change her fate. Closing her eyes, she made a silent vow. She would not let the actions of others define her. She would rise above their judgment, no matter how long it took. As the sun began its descent, Amina rose to her feet, her body protesting every movement. She looked at the road ahead, its dusty path stretching into the horizon. It was a lonely road, but it was hers to walk. With renewed determination, she set off once more, her steps slow but steady. The shadows of the past still lingered, but the light of the future began to flicker in her heart. Amina was no longer walking aimlessly. She had a purpose, a mission, and she would see it through to the end. The sun was high in the sky, its rays relentless as Amina trudged along the dusty road. Her feet were blistered, and her energy was all but spent. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she pressed on, fueled by the faint hope of finding safety. Her eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of life, but the vast expanse of the savannah stretched endlessly before her. Just as her legs threatened to give out, the distant creak of wooden wheels reached her ears. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. Squinting against the sun, she saw a cart approaching, its outline blurred by the heat waves rising from the ground. A pair of donkeys pulled it, their steady pace kicking up small clouds of dust. Sitting atop the cart was a man, his wide-brimmed hat shading his face from the sun. Amina hesitated, her instincts warning her to be cautious, but desperation won out. She stepped onto the road and raised a trembling hand. The cart slowed as it drew nearer, and the man pulled the reins to a halt. "Are you all right?" he called out, his voice deep but gentle. Amina nodded weakly. "I need help," she managed to say, her throat dry and scratchy. The man climbed down from the cart, his movements deliberate and calm. As he approached, Amina took a step back, her body tense. He stopped a few paces away, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "My name is Sulaiman," he said. "I'm a merchant, traveling to the next village. You look like you've been through something terrible. Let me help you." Amina studied him for a moment, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit. But Sulaiman's face was kind, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Slowly, she nodded. Sulaiman helped Amina onto the cart, offering her a flask of water and a piece of bread. She accepted gratefully, her hands trembling as she ate and drank. The food and water revived her enough to speak. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't come along." Sulaiman nodded. "You're safe now. We'll reach the village by nightfall. Do you have family there?" Amina shook her head, her gaze dropping to her lap. "No, I have no one." Sulaiman didn't press her for details, sensing that she wasn't ready to share her story. Instead, he talked about his work as a merchant, describing the different villages he visited and the people he met along the way. His voice was soothing, a welcome distraction from the storm of emotions swirling inside her. As the cart rolled on, the landscape began to change. The endless savannah gave way to clusters of acacia trees, their branches providing occasional patches of shade. The distant outline of a village came into view, its thatched roofs glowing in the golden light of the setting sun. When they arrived in the village, Sulaiman brought Amina to the home of Mariam, a widow known for her generosity. Her small mud brick house stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by a neatly tended garden. Sulaiman knocked on the door, and Mariam answered almost immediately. She was a woman in her 50s with a warm smile and eyes that sparkled with kindness. "Sulaiman," she exclaimed, "what brings you here at this hour?" "I found someone who needs your help," he said, stepping aside to reveal Amina. Mariam's smile softened as she took in the young woman's appearance. "Come in, child," she said, ushering Amina inside. The interior of the house was simple but welcoming, with colorful mats covering the floor and the faint aroma of spices lingering in the air. Mariam led Amina to a low stool and brought her a bowl of stew and a cup of tea. Amina ate in silence, the warmth of the food soothing her weary body. Once she had finished, Mariam sat beside her. "You don't have to tell me everything, but if you want to talk, I'm here to listen." For a long moment, Amina said nothing. But Mariam's gentle presence made her feel safe, and the words began to spill out. She told Mariam about the accusations, the ritual, and the betrayal that had driven her from her village. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and tears streamed down her face. Mariam listened without interrupting, her expression a mixture of compassion and sorrow. When Amina finished, she reached out and took her hand. "You've been through more than anyone should have to bear," Mariam said, "but you're still here. That says a lot about your strength." Amina looked down at their joined hands, her heart aching with gratitude. "I don't know what to do now," she admitted. "I've lost everything." Mariam squeezed her hand. "You haven't lost everything, my dear. You still have your life, and that means you have a chance to start over. It won't be easy, but you're not alone. You can stay here for as long as you need." That night, as Amina lay on a mat in Mariam's home, she felt a small flicker of hope for the first time since her ordeal began. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but the kindness of Sulaiman and Mariam had reminded her that there was still goodness in the world. As she drifted off to sleep, Amina made a silent vow. She would find a way to rebuild her life, to reclaim her dignity, and to honor the strength that had carried her through the darkest of days. She didn't know where the road would lead, but she knew she wouldn't walk it alone. The days passed slowly in Mariam's home, each one marked by a growing sense of restlessness within Amina. Though her body began to heal, her blisters faded and her strength returned, her heart remained heavy with the weight of what had been done to her. Every night, as she lay on the mat under Mariam's roof, the faces of her father, the elders, and the villagers haunted her dreams. She remembered her father's eyes, the way they refused to meet hers as the dirt piled over her body. She had trusted him, leaned on him for guidance her entire life, and yet, when the whispers of the community grew loud, he had turned against her. The pain of his betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever known. During the day, Mariam would sit with her, offering quiet comfort. "You've endured so much, child," Mariam said one afternoon as they shared tea in the shaded corner of the garden. "But you are still standing. That is no small thing." Amina looked at the older woman, her expression filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel lost. My father, my family, my village. They were supposed to protect me, but they threw me away like I was nothing." Mariam placed a comforting hand on Amina's shoulder. "Sometimes those closest to us fail us in ways we could never imagine. But their betrayal does not define who you are. Only you can do that." Later that evening, Amina found herself sitting by the small mirror in Mariam's room. The reflection staring back at her was almost unrecognizable. Her face was thinner, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was something else there too, a spark of determination. She thought back to her days in the town, to the teachers who had praised her intellect and the friends who had shared her dreams. She had been someone full of potential, someone who wanted to bring change to her community. That Amina was still there, buried beneath the pain and betrayal, waiting to rise again. "I am not what they say I am," she whispered to herself, her reflection her only witness. "I am more than their lies and their fear." The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the small window, Amina sat with Mariam over breakfast. The widow had become a source of wisdom and strength, her calm demeanor a balm to Amina's wounded soul. "I need to go back," Amina said suddenly, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. Mariam looked up from her bowl, her brow furrowing. "Back to Tumaini?" "Yes," Amina said, "but not to beg for their forgiveness or to plead my innocence. I need to prove it. I need to show them the truth." Mariam set her bowl down and leaned forward. "That's a dangerous path, child. They've already shown you what they're capable of." "I know," Amina replied, her fists clenched on the table. "But I can't live like this, hiding, running. If I don't stand up for myself, who will? I have to show them that they were wrong, that I am not the person they think I am." Mariam studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If this is the path you choose, you won't walk it alone. I'll help you however I can." With Mariam's guidance, Amina began to plan her return. She thought carefully about the accusations against her, dissecting the lies and rumors that had led to her downfall. She realized that the only way to clear her name was to gather proof of her innocence, of the hypocrisy of those who had judged her, and of the lies that had poisoned her village. "I'll start in the town," she told Mariam one evening as they prepared supper. "There are people there who know me, who can vouch for my character. If I can gather their testimonies, it will be a start." "And then?" Mariam asked, her voice gentle but probing. "And then I'll return to Tumaini," Amina said, her gaze fixed on the horizon outside the window. "Not as a victim, but as a force of truth. They need to see the person they tried to bury. They need to face what they've done." That night, as Amina sat under the stars outside Mariam's home, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with danger and uncertainty. But she was no longer the frightened girl who had been cast into the ground. She was someone new, someone forged in pain and betrayal, someone who would not be silenced. Looking up at the vast sky, she made a silent vow. She would not rest until she had reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her place in the world. Whatever it took, she would rise again. The road back to Tumaini was both familiar and foreign. The same dusty paths Amina had walked countless times as a child now felt fraught with tension, each step laden with the memories of betrayal. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and determination, but her resolve carried her forward. She had gathered enough evidence from the town, testimonies from teachers, friends, and mentors who knew her character. But would the truth be enough? As she approached the outskirts of the village, the sight of the baobab tree sent a chill down her spine. It loomed as a silent witness to her past ordeal, its gnarled branches stretching out like fingers accusing the heavens. Villagers working in the fields stopped and stared, their tools paused midair as they watched her approach. Whispers rippled through the air like a gathering storm. "She's alive," one woman gasped, clutching her chest. "Didn't they bury her?" Another murmured, her face pale. The whispers grew louder as Amina entered the village, her head held high despite the weight of their stares. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and curious. Men gathered in small groups, their voices low but their expressions unmistakably shocked. Amina ignored them, her focus fixed on the center of the village where the elders often met. The elders were seated in their usual circle beneath the baobab tree, their faces weathered but stern. Abasi sat among them, his gaze fixed on the ground as if he could sense her presence before she even arrived. When Amina stepped into the clearing, the murmurs of the villagers faded into an uneasy silence. Baraka, the eldest and most respected among them, rose to his feet. His voice was steady but tinged with disbelief. "Amina," he said slowly, as if testing the reality of her presence. You were dead." "I was buried," Amina corrected, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I was never dead. I am here now, and I have come to tell the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Amina's gaze remained fixed on Abasi. Her father finally looked up, his face a mask of guilt and fear. She took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. "You betrayed me, Baba," she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You let them bury me alive, your own daughter." Abasi's lips parted, but no words came. The other elders shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their authority suddenly feeling fragile in the face of her accusation. Amina turned to the crowd, raising her voice so that all could hear. "You judged me based on whispers and lies. You condemned me without evidence, without giving me a chance to defend myself. You called me a disgrace, but the real disgrace is your willingness to believe the worst without question." She pulled out a bundle of papers from the satchel slung over her shoulder. "These are testimonies from people who know me. Teachers, friends, and mentors who can vouch for my character. They speak the truth that you refuse to see." She handed the papers to Baraka, who accepted them with shaking hands. The other elders leaned in to read, their expressions shifting from skepticism to unease. "And you," she said, pointing to Abasi, her voice breaking with pain. "You were supposed to protect me, you were supposed to be my father, but you let fear and pride blind you. You let them take me, and you said nothing." Abasi lowered his head, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. "Amina," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong. I failed you." The silence that followed was deafening. The villagers looked at each other, their expressions a mix of shame and discomfort. Amina's words had pierced through their defenses, forcing them to confront the roles they had played in her suffering. Mariam stepped forward from the crowd, her voice calm but firm. "This girl has endured more than anyone should, yet here she stands, stronger than ever. If that doesn't make you question your actions, I don't know what will." The villagers began murmuring again, but this time the tone was different. Regret, apology, and a hint of admiration filled the air. One by one, they began to lower their heads, acknowledging their guilt in the silent language of shame. Baraka cleared his throat, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed the crowd. "Amina has shown us the truth. She has shown us courage and resilience beyond what we deserve. We must ask ourselves how we allowed this to happen, and how we can ensure it never happens again." Amina stood tall, her heart pounding. She had done what she came to do. She had reclaimed her voice, her truth, and her dignity. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. As the crowd began to disperse, Abasi approached her, his face lined with regret. "Amina," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." She looked at him for a long moment, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and love. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted, "but I hope one day I can." As the sun set over Tumaini, its golden light casting long shadows on the ground, Amina turned to leave. She had faced the past and spoken her truth. Now it was time to build a future. The weight of silence hung over Tumaini in the days following Amina's return. The villagers, once so quick to pass judgment, now avoided her gaze as she walked through the streets. They whispered to one another in hushed tones, their words filled with a mix of shame and curiosity. Amina carried herself with quiet dignity, but the heaviness in her heart remained. She had confronted her father and exposed the truth, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. Abasi, meanwhile, had become a shadow of his former self. The man who once stood tall as a pillar of the community now moved through the village with slumped shoulders and downcast eyes. He could not escape the memory of Amina's voice breaking as she spoke her truth. Her words were played in his mind endlessly. "You were supposed to protect me." One morning, Abasi stood at the doorway of Mariam's home, his hat clutched tightly in his hands. The older woman answered, her sharp gaze softening when she saw the broken man before her. "She's in the garden," Mariam said simply, stepping aside to let him in. Abasi walked slowly through the small house and into the backyard, where Amina was tending to a row of herbs. The sunlight caught her face, highlighting the strength that had carried her through so much. She looked up when she heard him approach, her expression unreadable. "Amina," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know where to start." Abasi knelt on the ground before her, his head bowed. "I failed you," he said, his voice trembling. "I let fear and pride blind me. I let the whispers of the village drown out the love I should have shown you. And for that, I will never forgive myself." Amina stared at him, her hands still gripping the small trowel she had been using. The sight of her father, a man she had once revered, now broken and begging, stirred a storm of emotions within her. Anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of compassion fought for dominance. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with pain. "What you did, it nearly destroyed me." Abasi raised his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. Please, Amina, let me make this right." Word of Abasi's public plea spread quickly through the village. For the first time in years, the people of Tumaini began to reflect on their actions. They saw how easily they had been swayed by fear and gossip, and how their rigid traditions had led to an unforgivable injustice. Nzi Baraka called for a gathering beneath the baobab tree, the same place where Amina had been condemned. This time, however, the mood was different. The villagers came not to accuse, but to listen. "Amina has shown us bravery beyond measure," Nzi Baraka began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Her resilience is a reminder that we must question the traditions that harm more than they heal. We must ask ourselves, what kind of community do we want to be?" The villagers murmured in agreement, their faces solemn. One woman stood up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "We have been so quick to judge, so quick to cast blame. But Amina's strength has shown us another way. We must do better." Amina stepped forward, her heart pounding as she addressed the crowd. "I don't want your pity," she said firmly. "What I want is for no one else to go through what I did. We cannot let fear and ignorance dictate our actions. The cycle of shame and sacrifice must end." Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. The villagers began to discuss ways to reform their practices, to ensure that no one would ever again be subjected to the kind of cruelty Amina had endured. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Tumaini, one built on compassion and understanding. Abasi approached Amina after the gathering, his expression still heavy with guilt but tinged with hope. "You spoke beautifully," he said quietly. Amina looked at him, her gaze softening. "It's a start," she said, "but words aren't enough. If you truly want to make things right, you need to be part of the change." "I will," Abasi promised. "Whatever it takes." In the weeks that followed, Abasi dedicated himself to earning back Amina's trust. He volunteered to work with the elders to rewrite village traditions, ensuring that they prioritized fairness and justice over fear and superstition. He listened to Amina's ideas and supported her efforts to rebuild her life. Slowly, the wounds between father and daughter began to heal. There were still moments of pain, still nights when Amina woke from nightmares of the grave, but there were also moments of connection. Shared meals, quiet conversations, and a growing sense of mutual respect. One evening, as the sun set over Tumaini, Abasi found Amina sitting under the baobab tree. He sat beside her, the silence between them comfortable. After a long pause, he spoke. "I am proud of you, Amina," he said, "more than you'll ever know." Amina turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And I am learning to forgive you, Baba. One day I will." As the stars began to appear in the sky, father and daughter sat together, their bond slowly mending. The past could not be undone, but together they were building a future filled with hope and understanding. The village of Tumaini, once steeped in rigid traditions and whispered judgments, began to change. The seeds of transformation were sown in the wake of Amina's return, her bravery a catalyst that inspired reflection and growth among its people. Though the scars of her ordeal remained, Amina resolved to turn her pain into purpose. With her name cleared, Amina stood taller than ever, her voice carrying weight in a way it never had before. The villagers who had once cast her aside now looked to her with a mix of admiration and guilt. But Amina did not seek vengeance, instead she sought progress. She understood that true justice would not come from punishing the past, but from building a better future. One of Amina's first steps was to advocate for education, especially for young girls. She visited neighboring towns and villages, sharing her story and urging parents to see the value of knowledge and independence for their daughters. "Education saved me," she would say. "It gave me the strength to fight for my life and my truth. We must give our girls the tools to stand tall, to think critically, and to protect themselves." Her words resonated, especially with mothers who had long wished for more opportunities for their children, but felt powerless against societal norms. With the support of Mariam and other like-minded women, Amina organized community meetings where people could openly discuss issues that had once been taboo: equality, justice, and the dangers of blind tradition. Amina's efforts quickly gained momentum. She worked with elders like Mzee Baraka, who had become one of her staunchest supporters, to establish a small school in Tumaini. It was a simple structure with thatched roofs and wooden benches, but it became a beacon of hope for the village. Young girls who had once been confined to household chores now came to learn. They studied reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also history and philosophy. Amina made sure that the curriculum included lessons on critical thinking and self-worth, planting the seeds of empowerment in each child who entered the classroom. Amina's classroom was not limited to children. She began evening sessions for adults, encouraging them to unlearn harmful traditions and embrace new ways of thinking. Slowly but surely, the community began to shift. The once unyielding elders softened, the judgmental whispers faded, and the women of Tumaini began to find their voices. The baobab tree, once a symbol of Amina's betrayal, took on a new meaning in the village. It became a gathering place for discussions and celebrations, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Under its shade, villagers shared stories, debated ideas, and planned for the future. Abasi, too, found his place in this new chapter. Though his guilt remained, he channeled it into action. He became a vocal advocate for Amina's initiatives, using his influence to rally others in support of education and reform. His relationship with Amina continued to heal, their bond strengthened by shared purpose. Years passed and Tumaini flourished. The small school grew into a larger institution, attracting students from neighboring regions. Women who had once been silenced now held leadership roles, guiding the village with wisdom and compassion. The children of Tumaini, both boys and girls, grew up with a sense of possibility that their parents could only dream of. Amina's story spread beyond the borders of her village. She was invited to speak at gatherings and conferences, her voice a beacon for those who had been silenced. Each time she spoke, she carried Tumaini with her, sharing its transformation as proof that change was possible even in the most unlikely places. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amina stood beneath the baobab tree, watching the children of the village play. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that had once seemed impossible in a place so steeped in pain. Beside her stood Mariam and Abasi, their faces reflecting the pride and peace that came from seeing a community reborn. Amina took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. She had come so far, and yet she knew her journey was far from over. There were more villages to visit, more girls to inspire, and more hearts to change. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her accomplishments and the hope that burned brightly in her heart. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Amina whispered a silent vow. to keep fighting, to keep teaching, and to ensure that no one else would ever have to endure what she had. Tumaini had been transformed, and with it so had she. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace it.